has gotten to after some stops and starts with Ukraine should give evidence of the fact of what the expectation of the American people is, what the expectation of our leadership is in Washington, D.C. I think we're going to continue to be a nation standing for freedom. President Trump will not change. Isolationism, I brought it up today. The president I serve with is not an isolationist. In fact, he has a strong secondary sanctions. And so I don't think, I said in my first trip to Europe as vice president, it was always my impression, America first doesn't mean America alone, but it does mean that our allies would live up to their word to do their part, and $140 billion more of investments by our NATO allies after our first 4 years was evidence that our allies across Europe, here in the UK, did the same. So I don't think you should have the view, other than we should all take the view that this is a real moment of testing of the West. But I think you'll continue to see American leadership.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask you about it. You introduced yourself after my introduction, dwelling on what it means to come from a state that makes a lot of things and exports them to the world. Do you think the tariffs that President Trump has brought in will outlast his administration?
Well, I hope not. In fact, the Supreme Court of the United States is now currently evaluating whether or not the statute the president has used to impose unilateral tariffs against friend and foe alike is even constitutional.
That is claiming that it is an emergency, using that as the basis for these tariffs.
Claiming it's an emergency statute, that there's a global emergency. But under our Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it provides that taxes and tariffs, which were called imposts back in the day, can only be enacted by the Congress. The small foundation that I started a few years ago in Washington, D.C. has filed briefs, one of which was cited in the Court of Appeals case, that we don't believe the president's use of that statute is consistent with the Constitution. And my hope is that a majority of the Supreme Court will conclude the same. I mean, the simple truth is that at the American founding, taxes on tea were kind of an issue. Those were tariffs. And so by the time they got around to that second draft of an American government in 1787 that we call the Constitution of the United States, the one thing they wanted to make clear was that no one person could impose import tariffs and taxes on the American people, that it would be done by the elected representatives of the American people. I'm hopeful that our Supreme Court will draw the same conclusion. Because as we've argued, and as people in the UK understand, whether it's your tariffs here on our goods coming in, or our tariffs on exports from the UK to the United States, I've made it clear that with the exception of maybe a small impact at the margin, that American businesses and American consumers pay American tariffs. And I think the concession by our administration just in the last few days that they were lifting tariffs on coffee and beef to lower prices at the grocery store kind of made my point. So I think the American people are sensing this. I think we're seeing inflation. We're seeing impacts in our economy, and my hope is that that whether it's the Supreme Court or whether the administration continues to tack and adjust, that we will return to using tariffs the way we did in our administration, which was we used tariffs and the threat of tariffs to negotiate down tariffs and trade barriers and non-tariff subsidies. I mean, President Trump threatened to do away with NAFTA and impose harsh tariffs on Canada and Mexico. It set the stage for us to negotiate the largest trade deal in American history, the USMCA. I was sent to give a major speech at the City of London to say that when Brexit was done, we were already putting together working groups to begin to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. I mean, it seems to me tariffs have their use as a means of facilitating negotiation, but in economic policy, I believe, with the exception of China, because honestly, after decades of trade abuses, intellectual property theft, I think we've got to stand firm on China. But other than that, I believe in free trade with free nations. And it's one of the ways the free world will prosper and prevail.
Thank you very much for that. You mentioned the Supreme Court, and I wanted to ask you about the quality of democracy in the US itself. We've got quite a lot of questions online on that, including one from Haida. Iqbal, thank you. I'm thinking both of the January 6th challenge, but even of a remark by the president in the White House last night at a press conference where he asked a question by ABC News, uncomfortable to his guest, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and suggested that ABC's license, one of the main broadcasters of the US, should be taken away. What about the quality of democracy in the US? What should the rest of the world make of it?
I'm very confident about American democracy. The American people cherish our representative government. They cherish, and I believe you'll see celebrations next year all across the country in big cities and small towns, remembering the signing of a Declaration of Independence, the ideals enshrined there. And my confidence really comes from having not only served in the Congress and as a governor and as vice president, traveled across our country continuously, but Karen and I, after we left the White House, we moved home to Indiana. We bought 5 acres and a pond, a riding mower, pickup truck. So we spent a lot of time traveling around the country, as well as just living in the heartland. And I have to tell you, there has not a day gone by traveling anywhere across the United States that I haven't been deeply humbled by having people come up to me on the right, on the left, everywhere in between, and express appreciation for our service, particularly on that fateful day. And it has reiterated to me the deep love the American people have for our Constitution. You know, we've had a few elections since then. There have been reforms at the state level for elections. The 2022 elections went off without a hitch. 24 elections worked out just fine for the president. We just had midterm elections, less so, but without controversy. And I think you can be confident the American people are going to continue to demand that we live up to that ideal and that principle of representative democracy.
I know there are going to be a lot of questions, so let me just ask you one more. You mentioned some points where you thought the UK was going wrong. We have the budget next week, where the Chancellor is expected to bring in a lot of tax rises and is grappling with the rising size of the state here. These are principles you've argued against all your life. Is this somewhere where you think the UK is going wrong?
Well, I would just caution friends about ignoring the real threat to the long-term security and prosperity of both of our countries, and that's public debt. And let me, before
I have to say the U.S. is in a worse position than the UK on that.
I was about to say, before I criticize my friends, when I arrived in Congress, our national debt was $3 or $4 trillion. It's $38 trillion today and rising. When I ran for president back in 2023, not so where you'd notice. But it was a rich experience. But I think only of the 8 candidates in that primary, not counting the one that won, only 2 of us were talking about the national debt. Only 2 of us were talking about the only real way to solve the national debt is with compassionate reforms of the entitlement programs that consume more than 80% of federal spending. Now, why did I open that up by saying the greatest threat to our security and prosperity? And the reason is, I think it was back in 2005, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was testifying before a committee I served on in Congress. And he was asked, what's the greatest threat to America's national security? And then, 20 years ago, he said, the national debt. 2 years ago was the first time in American history that we spent more money on interest on our national debt than we did on our national defense. I would say to you, don't look to us as a good example. But I would urge friends across the pond here, maybe lead like Great Britain has done before. You know, a lot of times I say that good ideas sometimes follow the sun across the Atlantic. And I'm not just talking about the Beatles. But policies that echo and they come to the West and they impact. I would love to see the people of Great Britain call upon their leadership to lead on the kind of fiscal reforms that will put us back on a sustainable path. I'll continue to be a voice for that in our country, but I think we have a moral obligation to lift this mountain range of debt off our children and grandchildren for our security and our prosperity, and I'll continue to champion it.
Thank you very much. Let's go to questions. Lots of hands up. Right, let me come here first in the front row.
Mr. Vice President, could you elucidate...
Could you say who you are?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sam Kiley from The Independent. Mr. Vice President, could you elucidate a little bit more on the perception we certainly have here in the United Kingdom and Europe that internal democracy in the United States really is under threat? There's been attacks on the judiciary, the media, the Pentagon, the armed forces have been eviscerated of potential critics. And certainly as I come from the African continent, the kind of incipient coup is pretty obvious to some of us.
I understand the perception and I understand the way actions get written about. But I just speak with confidence about the expectations of the American people. And the American people cherish our democracy. They cherish our republic. And I actually believe, you know, I've said many times, January 6th was a day of tragedy. But thanks to the heroes in uniform, the riot was quelled. And you witnessed Republican and Democrat members of the House and Senate reconvene the very same day to complete our work under the Constitution. So that day of tragedy became a triumph of freedom. And while, as I said, I still have my critics, even in my own party, on my actions that day, I believe the overwhelming majority of people in my party and across the country look to that day and are grateful to all of us. Now, the only heroes I saw that day were wearing uniforms. But the fact was that every member of the House and Senate, Republican and Democrat alike, reconvened the very same day and did their duty and did their work. Should be a source of great confidence. There's always, with changing administrations, there's always cross currents and perceptions can vary, but I have great confidence in the expectations of the American people, and you should too.
Okay, thank you. The woman right here towards the back, 2 in from the aisle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Judy Harthi from the Leadership International Program at Chatham House. We're all witnessing the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia's visit right now to the White House, and we're hearing about a potential defense pact and new AI agreements. We're hearing also that this partnership will evolve beyond the traditional. What will that look like in the short term and in the long term?
Well, I saw a lot of the press coverage yesterday, and people seemed surprised at the engagement with Saudi Arabia for a variety of reasons. But it's important to remember that the first international trip that the president took under our administration was to Riyadh. We engaged Arab nations directly and immediately, even while we stood without apology with our most cherished ally, Israel. We, as I said, moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. We recognized the Golan Heights. We were told by many sincere voices in international relations that that would result in harvesting the whirlwind, that war would break out in the region. In fact, what broke out was the Abraham Accords. 2020, while the world was wrestling with the worst pandemic in 100 years, we still nevertheless were able to gather on the south lawn of the White House and have two Arab nations normalize relations with Israel. And while I've expressed concerns here during my trip in the UK about the sale of F-35 aircraft to Saudi Arabia, I mean, given that's the most advanced aircraft platform that we have, stealth technology, and I am hopeful the administration will carefully consider the transfer of that technology to Saudi Arabia and take steps to ensure that that technology does not fall into China's hands.
Forgive me, is that your main concern, that that China gets access to it as opposed to changing the balance of power?
It is a very real concern because I'm very aware of our military superiority and our technologies, and the F-35 platform is chief among them. But the other part of that is I hope what comes from it is I hope Saudi Arabia will find its way onto the Abraham Accords. That would be a colossal development in the region, and it may well signal, after the horrors of October the 7th and the tragedy of the war the necessary war that Israel prosecuted in Gaza since, it might well herald a completely new season for peace in the region.
Okay, thank you. Here, second up.
My name is Nishan Chilkuri, Chatham House member, and I work for the Daily Mail. Mr. Vice President, you've obviously paid a big price for your commitment to upholding the Constitution. Going into the next election, do you expect to see actions that will challenge it yet again? What are your biggest fears?
Well, let me say I don't know about paying a price. Last Tuesday, in our country, on November 11th, we remembered people that really pay a price. And but I can honestly tell you that I don't have those concerns. I mean, there always are going to be voices on the fringes of the right and the left. It seems, particularly with social media, that they find megaphones on the right these days more than they found them before. But I have to tell you that the American people that I know just won't have it. It just won't have it. It was one of the reasons why on that day, I remember as I was witnessing with my wife at my side, we had been escorted off of the Senate floor. The Secret Service wanted me to leave the building, but I was determined to stay at my post and finish our work. By God's grace, we did. But I remember looking at that small television set, seeing people smashing windows and assaulting police officers, and I just found myself thinking, not this, not here, not in America. and particularly not the people of our movement. I will maintain to you that the people that engaged in violence and vandalism on that day did not represent even much more than a fraction of the people of our movement, people that I was among for 20 years and 4.5 years as a candidate and as a vice president. Those people love our institutions. The American people, I think, are the most generous, most patriotic, most God-fearing, innovative people the world's ever known, and they're going to hold our country to account in the days ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to take another one here, front row.
Jonathan Rugman from Channel 4. I wanted to ask a question about a former resident of Indiana, actually, the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was a student there. Yesterday, the president said that the Saudi Crown Prince knew nothing about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Do you believe that? And did you see evidence to the contrary when you were in the White House, given that the subsequent intelligence assessment, which was published, said otherwise?
I would not have said that. Beyond that, I would not. I think the president also praised his record on human rights. Look, there's.
Just to be clear, you would not have said that the Crown Prince knew nothing about it.
Well, I really can't speak to intelligence that I was exposed to.
Well,
But,
President Biden published the assessment.
but what I can tell you is that I would have not have made that statement. And I think part of foreign policy, you've talked about it here for 100 years at Chatham House, you got to take the world that you find. And you got to make relationships with sovereigns as you find them. And so I do think the relationship with Saudi Arabia is one that we need to find a way forward on. But I think it's very important that we never cast aside. We never cast aside our deep commitment to freedom, to the freedom of the press, to and I can tell you, I just simply I would have had I been given the opportunity to be sitting in that right-hand chair in front of the fireplace, that meeting would have gone a little different.
Right at the back near the door. Olivia.
Thank you, Olivia O'Sullivan, Chatham House, and thank you for speaking to us today, Mr. Vice President. I have a question about immigration. In your remarks, you said when the UK makes certain choices, including around open borders policies, it raises questions among some in the US about the relationship and the alliance. In the past year, this UK government has significantly tightened immigration rules on skilled workers, on family reunification, for students, and most recently on refugee status. So when you say open border policies, can you say specifically what you mean? And in your view, what immigration policies should countries pursue in order to be assured the US will remain their ally? Thank you.
Well, I speak more about perceptions in our country about the UK. And I don't believe in foreign interference in elections or policy. So I'll leave you to that. But there has been a perception of open borders, not only in the UK, but among other European nations. And the Biden administration essentially undid all the policies that we had put into effect that secured our southern border and ended asylum abuse almost overnight with what actually I negotiated came to be known as the Remain in Mexico policy. We required people, if they applied for asylum in the United States, that we would process their application, but we would require them to wait in Mexico as opposed to disappearing into the United States as literally millions were able to do in years before and after. The new administration has put all those policies back into effect, and essentially illegal immigration and asylum abuse has virtually disappeared. A nation without borders is not a nation. And I think it's absolutely essential that that our nations not only secure our borders, but I will also say to you, I think our immigration system in America is broken. And I can't speak to it here in the UK, but it looks like you might have the same problem. I mean, immigration ought to be an invitation for people to come in to your country. I think it was Adam Smith that said, no nation grows but by population. So you want positive immigration into your country, but you also want people, to come to the UK to be British. We want people to come to the United States to be Americans. My grandfather got on a boat in Ireland in 1923, sailed across the Atlantic, stepped onto Ellis Island, never lost that Irish brogue. Michael Richard Pence was named after Richard Michael Cawley. Proudest man I ever knew, and he was a proud American. He never forgot his home across the pond, but in what he used to call the old country. And I've been to that house he grew up in. But he came to be an American, to embrace American ideals. I don't think we have, in our country, I'll just say, I don't think we have an orderly system of immigration that really ought to open the doors based on merit into the country in ways that will benefit people who aspire to live the American dream, but also meet the needs of our country. And to the extent that the UK faces the same challenges, but to me, the first order of business is secure the border. Stop the flow of illegal immigration and illicit drugs coming into our country, claiming hundreds of thousands of American lives. The second step is the one we're waiting to do, and that is to reform a broken immigration system, and I hope we will.
Thank you for that. There are so many hands up, and I am so sorry that we are going to have to stop right there. There are terrific questions online as well, everything from rare earths to fossil fuels. Someone has said in Trumpian capitals, welcome, dear VP, thank you for your service to the world, sir, as well. And we have lots more. The Taliban and Jeffrey Epstein, not normally entities you get in successive paragraphs of text, I have to say. There are so many questions, and we could do justice to only a few of them, but I wonder if you could join me in thanking Mike Pence.